Alright, this is my first video of 2026, and today I am reviewing this new sci-fi anime film called All You Need Is Kill. So, for those who aren't familiar, this is based on the light novel of the same name by Hiroshi Sakurazaka. There's also a manga, and in 2014 there was even a live-action Hollywood adaptation called Edge of Tomorrow starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. Whenever people talk about this, they always bring up the Tom Cruise movie, and I can remember way back when that was a thing. All You Need Is Kill was probably the first light novel that I ever read. In fact, I might be remembering wrong, but I think that might have been the first time that I ever even heard the term light novel. Now, most of the time, anime based on light novels end up being disasters, because they usually end up cutting out huge chunks of the story for time and pacing, and there were definitely moments of that in this, but we'll get to that in a moment. So, although it's been a long time since I've read the light novel, I can confirm that this new film is very different in a number of ways, but it still does follow the same premise. One major difference is that in the novel, the characters are depicted as a military force, but in the movie they are much more like a disposal team or a maintenance crew. They are not military. So if you don't know the story, basically one day the Earth gets attacked by these alien-like creatures called mimics, but there's these two members of the crew named Rita and Keiji who discover when they die that the day restarts over and over again Groundhog Day style. They are the only two that can remember anything, and every time the day restarts, they have to repeatedly go through trial and error in order to find a way to defeat the mimics and escape the time loop. This was directed by Kenichiro Akamoto, who has never directed anything else, but for a first-time director, this was real impressive. This really exceeded my expectations. Of course, I do understand that a lot of the negative reviews seem to be coming from fans of either the light novel or the manga. Though I say this all the time whenever I talk about adaptations of anything, and I feel like someday I'm going to make a whole video on this topic, but an adaptation needs to have its own soul, instead of just being a word-for-word copycat of the original. This goes for anime, this goes for movies, this goes for dubbing, this goes for anything. An adaptation has to be able to stand on its own. And I thought it was real creative how they went about reimagining different concepts from the novel and bringing them to the screen. Obviously, lots of stuff was trimmed out of the story, and there's definitely some parts that are much further explored in the novel, but with most adaptations of literature, that's to be expected. There's also been lots of complaints about the art style and character designs because, if you don't know, the designs look nothing like how they looked in the light novel or the manga, but I honestly think this works in the movie's favor. Now, I know that it's not my place to criticize professional artists, but I think the designs in the novel are just way too stock. I'm not trying to say that the designs in the movie are better than the novel. Those designs definitely work for the novel, but thematically, the movie would not have the same lasting impact if they just copied those designs. I've heard some people compare the way the characters look to, like, Code Lyoko. Like, they have the same large foreheads and the eyes that are spread apart, and then some of the background characters kind of look like Zelda Wind Waker designs. I understand that it might be weird to some people, and it's not the most traditional, but I just think it's real neat that it's trying to go for a different look instead of just typical anime designs. I love all of the exaggerated faces. Every one of the characters is just built differently. I also love the minimalistic design of the mech suits. In the light novel, as well as the manga, the mech suits looked like a mix between Master Chief and Samus Aran, but in the movie, they looked like something inspired by famous French artist Jean Giraud, better known as Mobius. In fact, that's one of the things I love about this movie, is that you can tell that it was heavily inspired by his work. Even though I haven't found any confirmation of this, the influence is pretty clear when you just look at the designs and the color palette. I did have some other stuff to say about the mech suits, but to avoid making a dumb joke, I'm just going to put this image on the screen and move on. I thought they did a real good job at making the mimics look frightening. They look like these giant neon-colored flower monsters that move real fast, and they just rip everything apart. The animation is just stunning as well. They did a good job at blending both 2D animation with cel-shaded CGI, especially during the final fight scene with all of the neon lights flashing on screen. Though I do have to warn my viewers in case any of you have epilepsy or something, especially at the very beginning of the movie. The beginning has a lot of flashes. This thing is almost like watching a laser light show. Otherwise, I thought it looked fantastic. There are also these POV shots, and it's done with CGI environments, and the 2D characters moving in the background just blend together so perfectly. Again, I can understand why some fans of either the novel or the manga might be disappointed by some of the changes that they made. And perhaps my biggest criticism is perhaps the characters do feel as though they are unfortunately underdeveloped compared to the source material. However, there are still plenty of scenes that I think did their job at making the characters emotionally compelling, so maybe we didn't really need a whole lot of development. It's more like you're just there, experiencing everything as it happens, like an outsider looking in. The one thing that everyone seems to be talking about, though, would have to be the ending, which I'm not going to spoil, but I will admit, although the ending does feel like a bit of a cop-out, it still does feel somewhat necessary for the story that they wanted to tell. There definitely are parts that could have been further explored, but ultimately I feel like the story got its point across. There were even some parts where I actually laughed. Every time the day restarts and Rita wakes up in her bed, it literally is framed exactly like when it happens to Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. All that was missing was the Sonny and Cher song and it would have been perfect. The atmosphere of the film was also real well handled. Not just through the visuals, but through the sound design as well. There are plenty of dead silent moments without any music, and it helps build tension. Like, it would not work the same if you had, like, a cheesy film score in the background. The silence is just deafening. A lot of people talk about the importance of music, but they often forget the impact of having a lack of music, and this handles it perfectly. Though I have to admit, I do have mixed feelings on the voice acting. I watched both the Japanese and English versions, and I think they're both about even. The actors who voiced Rita and Keiji in both versions did a great job, but I thought the rest of the cast was just okay. I'm not saying the rest of the cast was bad, but they were just kind of generic, and that goes for both the Japanese and English versions. But I personally do think the Japanese version had better dialogue, or at least based on the subtitles, I thought it did a better job at telling the story. I did not like some of the dialogue choices in the English version. There were times where it seemed like it was trying to be campy when it didn't really have to be, but I guess it's down to interpretation. Even with my dyslexia, reading subtitles in the theater was really not a problem because the story is told mostly through visuals. And let me tell you, seeing this up on the big screen was a real treat. Even though it gets some stuff wrong, it just gets so many things right in the end, and the movie was ultimately a fun ride. My final rating? I have to give it a 9 out of 10. I really had a blast watching All You Need Is Kill. I'm not even going to compare this to Edge of Tomorrow because I hardly even remember that movie, probably because I cannot stand Tom Cruise to be perfectly honest. Anyway, overall, I thought All You Need Is Kill was an amazing film, especially from a first-time director, and I hope Akamoto directs more stuff in the future. So, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you all next time.